Welcome to the Missoula Organization of Realtors Candidate Interview Forum. I am pleased that each of you took the time to be here today. I'll be asking each of you 3 questions. To keep the answers fresh and interesting, we'll alternate tables for each question. So we have 2 tables, so we only have 2, not 3. So we'll do more than just 3 rounds, I guess. So the first time I read a question, I will provide background information. Every time I ask the question following that, I will not include the background. But if you need me to repeat it, I can. The timer, who is our lovely man, Akira this time, okay. We'll show you a yellow card when your time is almost up. And at that point, please prepare your closing thoughts. When the red card is shown, it is time to move on to the next question. We'll start out with a brief introduction from each of you. We last time gave 3 minutes for each question. We'll probably go a little bit longer because we don't have as many of you. So we'll try to make sure it's even for everybody. All right, so let's start with an introduction from each one of you. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Mr. Curdy, we'll start with you.
Okay, my name is Willis Curdy. I currently live with my wife on Corner Ranch Road in the Big Flat. We've lived in the Big Flat area for approximately almost 28 years. I came to Missoula. I was born in the Bitterroot, raised on a dairy farm there, and I came to Missoula in 1967, attended the University of Montana on an athletic scholarship, played football here for a couple of years, not at junior college in Washington. I took a job teaching high school at Hellgate High School. I taught there for 30 years, taught U.S. government, Montana history, American history, and economics. I have a BA in history, and a MED and a minor in economics. During the summers, I was a smoke jumper at the U.S. Forest Service, or with the U.S. Forest Service. I have over 300 jumps as a smoke jumper, served from a low oil pogue to a fire manager, fires up to 600 plus acres in size. And in 2000, I left Hellgate to take a job as a commercial pilot with the U.S. Forest Service. I have all my commercial pilot ratings, and I flew for the Forest Service for approximately 7 years until they told me I was too old to work there anymore. And currently I farm with our family up the Bitterroot, where we have our farm and ranch that the family has owned for approximately 60 years.
My name is Carolyn Squires, and I'm the current senator for Senate District 48. But due to term limits, I will be term limited out, and so is an opening in House District 96, which is 1/2 of my current Senate district. So I've chosen to run again to represent that area, and that happens to be the area that I live in. My husband and I, who are both retired, my husband was an employee of Stimson Lumber, Van Evans, and ran the gamut here, as everybody knows, the mills that were in the area during his career in working. I was a licensed practical nurse for 32 years at Missoula Community Hospital. Came from the old hospital where you'll find the library sitting currently out to the new facility out at the community, where they started out with a physical therapy department and then actually built the hospital. I scrubbed the walls and the beds because they forgot to put that into the contract. And so instead of getting extra money, we were also excited about having beds that you could push a button and people would go up instead of cranking at the bottom and always being there. So therefore, I've spent a fair amount of time. I worked in the pediatrics and house float, and which means you work in all the areas. So those 32 years. And then after I left there, I went to work for the Montana State AFL-CIO Project Challenge Work Again, which is a program that helped dislocated workers, and a dislocated worker is a person who loses their job through no fault of their own. People like the Smurfit Stone folks are dislocated workers, and I helped them access retraining, helped them to keep their homes, helped them with some of their needs such as electricity, water, those kinds of things. until they could get into a training program and then find new employment. I worked there for 5 years and considered it one of the best jobs I ever had. One of the most exciting things about that particular job was it was Monday through Friday. Now, some of you understand about Monday through Friday, but in 32 years, I didn't know about Monday through Friday. And there was Saturday and Sunday. And wow, did I find out how much fun it was to have Saturday and Sunday off. And also to be able to leave some paperwork where people weren't going to die if I didn't finish the tasks. So it was kind of a welcome relief, but I do miss my nursing career, but I know that I'm not capable as the physical needs are more than they used to be. My husband and I, like I say, have lived at our current home for over 40 years. I live across the street from Franklin Park. I have always lived in my district, and I've always considered the people in my district my friends and my neighbors. And we have had a very close relationship, as I've been fortunate enough to represent that area for 22 years. So therefore, I feel good about my running again. I feel that I'm a part of the neighborhood, and I feel I do a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Squires. Ms. Sands?
Hi, I'm Diane Sands. I'm the current legislator for House District 95, which is kind of the slant streets, Wapakia, and then it kind of goes up the hill. This will be my 4th term. I'm running unopposed, so I probably didn't have to show up, but I like to come talk to you and find out what's going on. And I'll be termed out after this session because of term limits, which I think is a real shame because it's really depriving the legislature of a lot of its leadership. So you get new people starting over all the time on every one of the issues. And trust me, that is not a service to the people of the state. I was born in St. Ignatius, been around for a long time, and grew up on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation in eastern Montana. We have a family ranch out of Circle, but I've been in Missoula since 1965 when I came here to go to school, with a couple little running off to here and there's. And I've probably lived in 30 different places in Missoula, so I feel like I know a lot of the communities pretty well. I think I've never lived in the Rattlesnake, but other than that, I think I've lived pretty much everywhere else. We now live up in Linda Vista. And I have a long and checkered career in everything from working for the Forest Service and running Youth Conservation Corps programs to I'm one of the people who started and was for a while the executive director and helped build the Partnership Health Center for the county, which I'm very proud of and do a lot of work with healthcare issues across the state. I'm trained as a historian actually from here and from George Washington University in DC, and have spent a long time. I taught at the university here and at MSU. The first course is in women's history and women's studies, and which is all quite appropriate since I now work at the County Historical Museum at Fort Missoula as their development director, but I also am the person who's taken on particularly the history of Fort Missoula as an alien detention center during World War II. And so I spend a lot of time dealing with historic preservation issues these days, and if any of you are interested or haven't been out there, I'd love to give you a tour of the place and some of our various projects. I worked at the Office of Public Instruction. I ran statewide races. I've run ballot campaigns here and in other states. So I have a lot of background in the political side of it, as well as sort of a real wide range of issues. I currently serve in the legislature on the Judiciary Committees, on the Health and Human Services Committees, and on the local government committees, with one charming session, I don't know what I was thinking, on fish, wildlife, and parks. I thought since I'd worked for the Forest Service, maybe I could be helpful there. No.
Is that the year they introduced wolves?
No, it was before that, yeah. Thank God I'm not on that committee anymore. And I currently chair the interim committee on Children, Family, Health, and Human Services that has jurisdiction over all of the issues dealing with the Department of Health and Human Services healthcare reform, and I'm the one who volunteered to take on medical marijuana as one of our interim topics, which I want to talk to you all about, is how that's affecting your lives, since I think you probably interact with that pretty frequently. So we're working on developing draft legislation for the next session that will try to control that and bring it more into what people, we think, thought they were getting when they voted for that. So that's kind of the hot seat. So healthcare reform and medical marijuana are my two current obsessions. So I think enough said.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
I'm Ryan Thompson. I'm running for House District 97. I graduated from Hellgate High School, grew up in Missoula. I then went from there to Montana State. Reason was because they had engineering and Air Force ROTC there, two things that aren't at the University of Montana. From there, I went in the United States Air Force for 4.5 years. I went to intelligence school for almost a year to be an Air Force intelligence officer, and then had the great privilege of serving at Special Operations Command, which was a lot of fun. From there, I got my MBA degree at Arizona State University in financial management and markets, and then was hired by Cisco Systems. That's Cisco with a C, so it's the networking company with computers versus the Cisco with an S, which is the food company. And I've been there for 6 years as a financial manager with them. What do I believe? I believe in smaller government, which is why I'm running. And basically smaller government across the board, which means I'm a fiscal conservative and a social moderate. And essentially why I'm running is to give a clear choice. I mean, my opponent, Michelle Reinhardt, is a fairly progressive liberal Democrat, and I'm a fairly conservative Republican/libertarian. So it'll be a very clear division between big government and small government.
Okay, thank you. And bear with me, we're going to do a little, like I said, a little change up. I think what I'll do is I'll address Table 1, Table 2, Table 3 issues, but then we'll rotate around the last one for these questions. So bear with me, I'm trying to shuffle that a little bit. All righty, we'll start here in Table 1, small domestic well exemption. Over the past several sessions, there have been numerous efforts to curtail or eliminate the limited exemption to the full permitting process administered by DNRC for smaller groundwater appropriations, which a large number of Montanans depend on for potable domestic water and stock water. Do you support maintaining this specific exemption for homeowners and businesses? Okay. Let's go ahead and start with Mr. Curry.
I've run into a couple folks who are dealing with that issue. I guess I'm concerned about the exemption process. It's been, I think, if I remember right, it's been worked on a number of times last couple sessions. Is that correct? Okay. And I think it probably needs some more work. I am concerned about, and this ties into the senior water rights issue, is that correct? Is that where you're eventually going with this? Okay. As a farmer rancher in the Bitterroot, person's family's had senior water rights on the large irrigation district, the Bitterroot irrigation district, and the daily ditch system. I'm concerned about, protecting those water rights. Those water rights, if an individual is willing to sell them, that's another issue. But I am concerned about maintaining those senior water rights. I understand the needs for individual homeowners. I am one myself. I have a well at my own home, so I understand what the importance of that. When I saw your brochure or your questionnaire, I was a little perplexed because I had not spent a lot of time dealing with the issue. But it's something that I think needs some work. We do need domestic wells, but we've got to work out a compromise so that we, provide water for those folks who need it for their homes, for their stock at their homes, and plus also where we are working with our farms. I know that's a pretty nebulous answer, but it's a process that I think needs some more work. I'm here to listen. I can see it from both a senior water right user and owner as well as a domestic homeowner. So it's something we still need to work on. I know there's a lot of conflict in certain parts of the state, including here in Missoula, about water use. But as I said earlier, I taught high school for 30 years. I know what it takes to listen, and I'll be willing to listen. I'm sorry, I just don't have an answer for you, a clear, concrete answer. I don't think right now anybody has a clear, concrete answer on how to solve the problem.
If I could inform that a little bit. The Interim Water Rights Committee, just at the end of the week, came out with their report and recommendations, and it's open for public comment until the end of August.
What did they decide, do you know?
I didn't have a chance to read it yet, Diane, that's my task tonight.
I have no idea.
But you'd all find it interesting, and it'll help inform you on that.
Okay, thanks, Mayor.
Well, it's important enough that we have an interim committee that addresses solely that topic.
Absolutely. They just got their work done, so we'll all just be reading it, so.
Okay.
Okay, and we're going to finish with the questions, and then we're going to go ahead and let people in the audience ask you questions after that. So we'll try to keep going with this, and keep the continuity going a little bit. Would you like me to read the question again?
No, I
Okay.
have it up here. I
Okay.
brought my copy of
Okay.
the question. I think, as far as I'm concerned, this has been an issue for not last session before. I mean, water is very, very important. It's very important to me. It's one of the resources that we cannot renew. And so therefore, I'm extremely concerned about what does happen to the water supplies and who has it. Now, if it hasn't passed, it means to me that somebody over on the east side doesn't like it either. So somebody's ox is being gored on the other side of the state as well, because normally those folks will get on board. We're usually the ones who have the official title of being the obstructors and so on and so forth. So I'm thinking that we aren't the only ones that may disagree or somewhatly agree on this. But I will tell you, it's not a subject that I have dealt with very much in the process. You have to pretty much be on the committee or in the interim committee before you get real knowledge about the particular subject. So I find this questionnaire in particular to be somewhat difficult to answer in many respects, because I forgot to tell you that I served on the State Administration Committee, Health and Human Services, and Business and Labor. I did not serve on the DNRC. I served 2 terms on local government and was off of those. So therefore, my exposure to this direct, intense comment in regards to a committee meeting and having people produce, such as Mr. Kaufman or others in this room, to us is not something that I've had the privilege or whatever to have dealt with. And when you find your specialty, you find yourself much more involved in that area. Now, if we're talking about what maybe Target Range did most recently out there, if that's part of the discussion, I'm extremely pleased about what they did out there, because I think for years they have fought the issue of being annexed into the city. And I think they've finally found a method of which, if they have control over their lives, and they also are looking at their own water sewer, or their sewage disposal, and they're also, being able to say how many houses per acre they want and how many sewer systems or septic systems will be there. So if that's part of the deal, then fine. I mean, I'm very happy with them, and thank God, because I rode with them from 1987 until now in regards to the annexation issue. Water rights, my husband will not give up his water right to the ditch that runs across from Franklin Park. So I, as he is a Bitterroter and born in Montana, know the significance of water rights. And if they're senior water rights, I understand that a little bit, so therefore I know the importance of water. So I will take a very close look at it. I won't guarantee you I will pass on a bill before I actually get to the legislature. And that's what I feel about all of these. I will not give you an absolute definite answer until I see the piece of legislation, because I would be doing you a disservice, because somebody could take and put in a phrase or a word, a shall, a may, a can, a cannot, that would affect the whole thing. So therefore, if any of those issues I addressed there, please take them for what they're worth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, table 2, our next issue that we're going to talk about is impact fees. In 2005, the legislature established important guidelines and restrictions on local governments imposing impact fees on new development. Unfortunately, several local governments that have imposed impact fees for various public facilities have failed to comply with with the letter and the spirit of the law. In some jurisdictions, impact fees are close to $10,000 per new single-family home and into the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars for some new businesses. Would you support legislation that clarifies limitations on the authority that local governments have to impose impact fees? Start with you, Ms. Sands.
You know, over the years, one of the things that I've learned, I mean, I grew up in eastern Montana and I live in an urban area here, is on one hand, we represent our individual districts. On the other hand, I also represent Missoula. On the other hand, we have to do what's best for the state of Montana. And you really see in the legislature that struggle between our handful of urban communities, the small towns, and the rural areas. And you don't see it any place as much as you see it on land use issues, because the issues are just different in a lot of cases. And to some degree, I'm a limited government person in the sense that, you know, when we've had legislation come down from Congress at the federal level saying, like around our driver's licenses, you have to do X or we're going to cut you off and you won't get any federal money for highways. How much we resented that as Republicans and Democrats both, because we feel we know what's in the best interest of people in the state of Montana. And the legislature has a tendency to want to tell local government and individuals at the local level what to do. But what may be best for someone in Missoula may not be what's best for someone in Macomb County. And the legislation we have to pass, I think, has to be able to accommodate the needs of people across the state. So in that sense, I think it is far better to clarify what the authority is of local government than to tell local government what it must do. And so a lot of the local government committee, I think, struggles with those two issues. On one hand, we get a laundry list of bills that are going to make everybody do whatever, just the same all over the state, even though there are really differences of opinions. And I think people have a right in different communities to define a lot of these issues for themselves. On the other hand, there is the issue of defining for local government what their authority is to make decisions for themselves. And philosophically, that's what I agree with this. Let local governments, to the degree possible, make these decisions for themselves, and they come out in very different places. So in general, I tend to support that. Until I would see a piece of legislation, I wouldn't tell you if I'd vote for it or not, but that's my general theory.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sands. Mr. Thompson.
So I have much the same conflict on this one. I mean, obviously, I believe to shove authority and governance down to the lowest level possible. And that means, you know, down to the county level on those and away from the state. So in that respect, I agree completely. And that would make me opposed to this legislation, because then you let the cities and counties do what they will. On the other side, I mean, I believe in lower taxes, and that's the way to stimulate economic growth and jobs and that sort of stuff. So if you have outrageous amounts by some of the localities that should be taken care of by the voters in those localities, but if there are things that are completely out of line, then, you know, I might be for putting in caps at the state level. But of course, it would be determinant on how high those caps were, right, and how outrageous the fees were. I mean, if there one case of 100,000, one case of 10,000, you know, probably isn't needed. But if it's a way for cities to backdoor tax people that otherwise they can't, then maybe the state would have to step in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thompson. All right, back to table one. Due process protections for property owners. Property owners around the state are witnessing an alarming assault on Montana's constitutional guarantee of due process. The plaintiffs in 2 ongoing court cases are attempting to eliminate the right of property owners to protest a zoning ordinance directly limiting what they can do with their land. Would you pledge to preserve this important due process protection for landowners in Montana's zoning statute? Mr. Prudy.
You know, due process is something that's guaranteed in the 5th and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and the Montana Constitution. Okay, that's a government teacher talking here. Okay, okay.
My government teacher.
Yeah, that's right. And kids. Okay. But anyway, you know, that is something that's very fundamental to us as American citizens, and it's something we need to make sure that all citizens are guaranteed. And that includes, you know, citizens' personal, let's say First Amendment freedoms as well as their due process in terms of redresses against their government. In this case, people should have protection of due process. We can't deny it. I think basically that's unconstitutional. Okay, so I know the courts tend to define what due process is from time to time, and there's little or nothing the legislature can do about that. But I believe that we need to protect due process, and we'll go with there. And I know a lot of people have problems with what government wants to do with, telling them what to do with their land and not do with their land. And but we need to, well, like I said, due process is there.
Thank you, Mr. Purdy. Ms. Squires?
Well, I'm not going to be as lengthy because I just support due process. I believe that everybody has the right to access to it. And if they feel that they've been impugned or impinged on, I think everybody has the right. It may not be to my satisfaction about what they're doing, and it may not be to my liking about what they're doing, but they, as citizens of the United States and as citizens of Montana, have every right to use that process.
Thank you, Ms. Squires. All right, table 2. Back on to the small domestic will exemption. Do you support maintaining the specific exemption for homeowners and businesses?
For what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll read the Over the past several sessions, there have been numerous efforts to curtail or eliminate the limited exemption to the full permitting process administered by DNRC for smaller groundwater corporations, which a large number of Montanans depend on for potable domestic water and stock water. Do you support maintaining the specific exemption for homeowners and businesses?
I don't know anything about that topic. It's not an issue in my particular committee or in my legislative district, so I have no idea until I saw the bill and heard an elaborate discussion of the issues. I would say the other thing to remind everybody is we take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I think it's the most it gives me goosebumps every time we do it. I think it's the most important thing we do, because we go up there not just to toot our own horn or the issues for our own community or our own particular party or interests. We carry those with us, but we all take a common oath to protect and defend the constitutions. And there are many cases where you'd like to say, those people really shouldn't be allowed to do X. But the constitutions guarantee you certain rights. And I think that's one of the most humbling parts of that process, and one of the importance of, unfortunately, term limits sort of kills it in some ways, is over the length of time to come to understand the separation of powers, that the courts have certain roles, even if you don't like it sometimes. The governor has a different role from us, what our role is, and how far our limits should be. And whether we're for a little more limited version of that or a little more expansive version of telling people what to do, the Constitution sets some pretty strong limits on what we can require people to do in state statute. And that's our job, to sort of try to strike a balance between that. And that's the place that you have those debates, and hopefully they're civil debates, where you bring in the interests of urban areas like Missoula and subdivisions that, subdivisions just aren't an interest in most of this state. The people who are on the local government committee who come from those really small rural towns, they don't even have subdivisions in those areas. Most of our counties aren't even zoned. So you're really talking about Mars versus Venus in some cases, particularly in the local government committee. People represent such very different interests. And I think that's why in so many of these cases, best to have the authority as much as possible be at the local level so they can respond to the local needs. Now, unlike the federal government, where unless the federal government holds certain powers and authority to itself, states have the power to act. Under Montana law and a court ruling that I disagree with, the state holds all the authority unless it expressly tells local government what it can do. So it's the exact opposite. We have to affirmatively tell local government, you can do X, which is a very different situation, which is why we get, I think, so many of these kinds of land use, water policy issues that come to the legislature that could be resolved at the local level, but they don't have the authority to make that decision. We have to tell them expressly that they either have the authority to make the decision or that they will make X decision. And so that's why I think the local government committee is probably one of the most contentious committees that we really have, is because that's where you see the people from those different committees, from those different communities in Montana, trying to find something that will fit everyone. And in many cases, it doesn't, in which case I think we should stay out of it. And about that specific topic, I don't really have an opinion at the moment. Oh.
Mr. Thompson?
I also got goosebumps when I took the oath of office to be an Air Force officer and protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and so forth and so on. On this issue, I think you asked the prior table, I think that was their first question. And I probably would support it. Obviously, I don't know that much about it, but believing in private property rights, I probably would support it. Obviously, you have to make sure you're not creating environmental damage to somebody else's property. That I would think would be the number one concern. Barring that, I mean, I'm a big believer in letting people do on their own private property what they want to without causing damage to somebody else. And then on their other question, of course, I would support any due process and petitioning of government against zoning ordinances that they don't want to comply to. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to win in court, but you should also always have the ability to petition your government and, have the due process of the law.
Thank you. All right. We're going to go back to impact fees. Would you like me to read that?
Yes,
again?
please,
Okay,
Kim, if you
no
could,
problem.
would.
In
Fine.
2005, the legislature established important guidelines and restrictions on local governments imposing impact fees on new development. Unfortunately, several local governments that have imposed impact fees for various public facilities have failed to comply with the letter and spirit of the law. In some jurisdictions, impact fees are close to $10,000 per new single-family home and into the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars for some new businesses. Would you support legislation that clarifies limitations on the authority that local governments have to impose impact fees?
Okay, we all must remember that counties and cities are creatures of the state. The state authorizes cities and counties to do the business of the state when the state says, okay, we can't do it and you folks need to carry through it, and you do it through the charters that the state gives to both counties and to the cities. So when the state says, okay, we're going to give you the authority to do this, I think the state has to keep in mind a couple things, and this is, again, pretty delicate. It has to say, okay, cities and counties, you can do this, but it also has to be very careful in saying, okay, you can do this, but you can't do this, okay? And so I think in that case, Kim and everyone, that the state probably needs to give a little more guidance and control over counties if they have, and cities, if they have exceeded the authority that that the state has given them in the first place. So, if the cities are, or local governments are going beyond what the state authorizes them to do, we don't like it when the feds tell us to do something that we don't like to do, and we don't like it when the state tells us something to do that we don't like done. The same has to go with the local governments. So again, the state first needs to be very clear about what powers and authorities it gives to the local governments, but also on the other hand that that cities and counties shouldn't go beyond what the state has authorized them to do. Because again, I'll go back and repeat, the state is the one who gives the counties and the cities authorization to exist in the first place. Okay, under state constitution, state law.
Thank you, Mr. Curdy. Ms. Squires?
Well, I had a very nice history lesson there. Thank you, Mr. Curdy. I greatly appreciate that. What I consider impact fees are those fees such as parks and sidewalks and those kinds of things. Am I wrong in regards to those? And I think we'd come to some kind of agreement amongst the folks that we were going to use in what we have currently now. But it's sort of my understanding that maybe some of the cities or places or our place right now are wanting more. And if you ask for more in this, then it will increase the price of a piece of property. And I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that. I like those social amenities, but I know that they cost money. And so I could say to the contractor, and good friend Mr. Bangs over there, it's the cost of doing business, but for doing it. But then that's not exactly right either, because it takes away from the person's ability to purchase to purchase a home. So therefore, what do we do here? I hope we negotiate with the local governments. And again, it's back to the local governments. And I think as long as you see the city and state and the country in the general confusion that it happens to be, I think you'll see more of a drive to put it back on the builder, in the fact that they think that they have the money, even though we aren't doing as well in building as we should be doing. I think you'll do it because I think folks see that there's a pot of money there until we get the recession and those things turned back around. And so I'm not excited about the sidewalks, for instance, over on the south side or west side of Missoula. I've helped obtain some money on both sections of that area that I represent for sewers, and was able to help the citizens there through the Treasure State Endowment. And we got $1.2 million and $1 million whatever for the other part. And that helped lessen the impact to the people when they put their sewers in. Now sidewalks, I've been looking and I can't find money in general with which to do that. And again, you need to take a look. My house was valued at much more, I shouldn't say much more, say 6-7 years ago than it is currently now. And that's a result of what's occurring within the marketplace. So I'm not gaining any. So guess what? I don't think my senior citizens peoples or other folks in my neighborhood are doing it. So I'm hoping that we can do it on a local level. And I've seen some of you before the city council and the county commissioners ask for it. I'm not sure that I believe that the state, even though I learned here something from Mr. Pretty, is the one to direct it, because again, as Diane talks about it, Harlowtown, Webo, whatever, I mean, those small towns out in the eastern part of the state or even around us, Drummond or St. Regis, don't have any concern that I'm aware of about putting these impact fees in. It's the big cities going against the little cities, I mean the rural areas. I don't really want to see them put up, and the additional, again, will increase the cost of housing. So there goes the American dream. So I don't know exactly what you do. But I think negotiations have to continue to be into discussion to figure it out. And if our city government is behind, then I think they should be pulled up, and spoken to, and general public should know, and we should figure this out. We are so much more progressive than any other city in the state of Montana in so many ways. It's unbelievable. And I find myself realizing that I could live nowhere else because I'd be run out on a rail for sure. But anyhow, we would like to negotiate. Thank you. Thanks, May.
He's waving a red flag.
I'm sorry, I wasn't looking.
That's why I patted you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll pat you now. Okay.
Can I get in on this?
Okay, last question. I think you guys both have actually kind of answered it on the due process protection for property owners. So unless you want to expound on that a little bit, okay. Thank you again for coming. I think what we'll do, since we have some more time, is go ahead and open it up for questions either from you or from the audience. So Do any of you have any questions or?
I do.
want to? Okay.
Well, I did carry, when we're talking about impact fees, the city of Missoula asked me to carry the bill a couple of sessions ago that expanded the length of time for homeowners to pay SIDs. I don't know how helpful that is. If you still are low income or have a fixed income, it's still darn hard to pay for those, but at least you have 20 years to pay them off instead of 12. So if you guys have other ideas of things we can actually do like that, we tinker. That's what we do, for the most part. And I think it's also important just to have that forum. I wanted to ask you about medical marijuana, my obsession. What impact, given we have all these people buying property and starting little dispensaries and grow operations in residential areas where people are growing marijuana, what are you guys hearing? I mean, this is the new growth industry, God help us all, but any of you had any experience with that out there in the field? What's going on out there?
We've had a number of comments from people, in fact, my wife had the problem too. The problem we've run into is people thinking that once medical marijuana was legalized, if they had a card, it was legal for them to set up a greenhouse inside their house and grow their own marijuana, which has incredibly detrimental effect on the house. Pretty soon you got a house full of mold. So that's the one place that we've run into it right away. And I've heard it from a lot of different people, so there must be hundreds of them out there that have had the problem, considering how many I've already heard from. And our response to that is that, you better change your landlord, your agreement. You better get in your landlord agreement, make it very specific. You do not grow anything in your house other than maybe a few normal house plants. And it doesn't matter if it's legal or not, it can still destroy the house. So that's been a problem.
And I hope you do tell that to the other realtors, because I mean, there's certain things that we'll try to control at the state level, but that's one I think as realtors you should be telling people
Yeah, we've been telling them that already, but,
about that.
yeah. And, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Are you hearing from people who are concerned about buying a home that might be near someone who's either growing or using? Not hearing that?
Haven't heard about that yet.
You are? A little bit?
We heard from somebody who has a home and a neighbor is doing this, and that's causing a lot of problems in the neighborhood because of the person that is dispensing from their home. And yes, we've heard from people that said that, it's not to the level of the violent and sex offender registry that we need, but, maybe it's going to go there. I don't know.
Well, we're going to do some of that, but I think you bring up that issue, and I was down talking to Lolo about this, is to some degree, Realtors Association could say something, Homeowners Association could do something about it. Communities that have business licensing could say you just can't do this in a residential area or zone it to light industrial or an appropriate area. Some places, and I know this is a big issue down in Lolo, some of them want to just put it on the outskirts of town, and I say, so you want to just sort of create sort of a red light district like we used to have where we put all the illegal things over there? Well, no. Yeah, it's legal. I mean, but so where should it be located if it's going to be legal? And then how do you get it out of residential areas like that? And some local governments don't have the authority, this goes back to those questions, to do it. And most counties don't have zoning, so they're screwed. They don't have that as a tool. Well, there you go. But most of them have some ability around business licensing and that to control the growing dispensing piece of it. The using is a different piece. But I really would appreciate hearing as you work through those kind of issues out there. We'll be finishing up some draft legislation to put a whole lot more parameters around that existing law, because I do think it really does affect homes and businesses and your business a lot.
I just wanted to ask, please, when you say that the house or houses next to a neighbor or whatever, what hassle or what problem? Is it traffic? Is it the fear that the kids will get to it? Is it,
It's
I mean-
all of those things. It's all of those things.
The odor from the being vented out of the house if they're growing.
And I've,
okay, no, I'm just trying to figure
Yeah,
out
no,
in
It's
what,
all of those
because, I mean,
small
if we,
children.
yeah, okay, if we put it downtown, it's sort of,
Well, if
Quote
in a
different.
residential area you're growing, you'll be growing more than one plant, you do have a mold problem. The county health department's very concerned about that, fire safety, those sorts of things. And if you own the property, you should be able to say you can either grow this in there or not. I think that's sort of a new level of adding them to all of your agreements on that. If you're buying it as your own residence, that's a sort of a different set of issues.
It still would be breaking zoning if you were running a business out of a residential.
Exactly.
In the city of Missoula, the zoning should be able to handle it, but it might take some specific legislation from the legislature to do that. But once you get out of the city of Missoula where there's no zoning, then it's going to be a whole lot bigger problem.
Right.
This may be some places not zoned.
So there's a lot of residential areas that are not zoned, but what do they do?
Right.
Well, that's why we have to give, I think the 2011 legislature, that's why the task is getting bigger and bigger for the legislature to deal with, because there are all these issues that are coming up, like you mentioned. I know in Lolo, we have one operation, the people came in to, they rented a building originally as a car dealership, a used car dealership, and it all of a sudden flipped over into being a marijuana dispensary. And the neighbors are complaining not only about the fact that it's just a dispensary, it's the fact that there's people coming and going all hours of the night. It's been extremely disruptive to the neighborhood. And these are seniors that are living there. They're suspicious of marijuana in the first place, nonetheless about everything else that's coming with it, and potential crime and concerned that the black market has invaded this operation. So, we've got the 2011 legislature has got a really big task ahead of it to deal with this thing if we're going to deal with it, and we can't incrementally get there. We're going to have to take a pretty,
We do everything
pretty
incremental.
bold, pretty extensive move, pretty bold move to where the people of Montana want to take it.
Okay, Mr. Kaufman, did you have a comment?
Just information, as you move forward with that, Diane, agricultural is exempted from zoning laws in the
Right.
state of Montana in certain areas, and so make sure you get the right definitions for what marijuana growing is, because at last it might be a cash crop in terms of its definition of agriculture, and then I want to respect
Exactly.
Mr. Banks greatly. If I get an interpretation as an agricultural operation, it is an agricultural operation.
It is, and in fact, we've had, my committee's been dealing with this for over 6 months already, and we have heard from the Department of Agriculture, because it is in fact, and probably will in the end be, as a grow operation, regulated as an agricultural product with all of its other things, and then dispensaries in a different way in health areas. But, I mean, it really highlights, when you talk about water, all the issues related to local government and zoning and who has what authority to do what. And, I mean, our committee will come up, we've been hearing from everybody from cities and counties and what they can do and what authority they've got, to health departments, to community safety people, to law enforcement. And our view is that we'll do what the voters, as the public, overwhelmingly voted for, to legalize medical marijuana for a limited number of people. We will do that and try to have as clear a bright line as we can for local governments and other entities as to what their authority is, and to make as clear a line between legal and illegal medical marijuana as we possibly can. So we've been, and this is a committee, for your education, of 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, 4 from the House, 4 from the Senate. And we will bring a committee bill, is what they're called, to the session, and then the legislature will deal with it in its ordinary way. But big topics like this that take a lot of work, like all your water policy, that's why there are interim committees that do that work in a slightly more nonpartisan kind of way over a longer period of time, outside of the cauldron of 90 days during the legislature. But I really would appreciate more of your input if you think there are ways we can tinker with it, because local governments are having to deal with all the zoning, business licensing issues, residential. It's kind of like childcare. Remember when we did all the childcare legislation? You don't have to have a license to raise a kid in your own home, but you can start taking people in as a home business, then you're in a different category. And if you want to open a center with more kids, then you've got to be in the appropriately zoned area. And so all of those same sorts of models and issues kind of float around this topic too. So I appreciate hearing more from you as you hear these issues
Okay.
play out.
Go ahead, Ken.
One more on that. With the mold issue that comes from growing plants in the house, as realtors, we are obligated to know the house and know what's going on. And I guess I just have a problem with, if we don't find out that they were growing in the house, it's going to come back onto the realtors because of the mold. Right now, we have a mold disclosure where the buyers can have the house checked for mold. I'm not so sure that if people have a law that if they have grown marijuana or anything like that in the house, that they are obligated to provide a mold study before
Interesting.
it's put on the market. Because it's gonna take something off of that buyer that's unknown what they're getting into.
I remember that issue about mold, not
Yes.
connected with, with marijuana, but I remember that was quite the issue about who accepts the responsibility and so on and so forth about that mold. So, yeah, yeah, I'm not sure I want to relive that, but I guess we might have to, okay?
I'm sure there are other topics. Anything
Unless
else you want
anybody
to
else
talk?
has any questions specifically related to marijuana.
Let's
We
move
have a
on.
couple more minutes, so if there's any other questions. If not, please feel free to stay after and converse. And I just want to quickly say thank you again for coming. And does anybody have anything else?
Colin.
Colin?
I just want to make one comment. As far as the impact fees go, if everybody in Montana was handling the impact fees like Missoula is, we wouldn't be here talking about it. Missoula's doing it the right way. They're following the law. They've got a good committee set up. Well, I think it's good because I'm on it, I guess.
Well, and we're a local government, you know, I mean, if you don't like what we do at the state level,
Yeah.
replace us. At the
Yeah.
local level, they make those decisions, and so, you know, if one community decides it wants to charge $10,000, and people will elect the people that made that decision. If they don't like it, they can get rid of them.
Well, see, that's why I told you, Colin, it's the best place to live.
It is.
It is the best place to live.
All right, well, we can wrap it up with a closing statement from each one of you if you so choose. I can start with Mr. Thompson if you'd like to, or you can pass.
No, I'll make a closing statement. I mean, these issues are all important, and they're all fairly specific and discrete. But, I mean, the overwhelming issue at the state legislature this term is going to be how to close the $400 million deficit. And that's going to take the overwhelming amount of the time and effort of the state legislature. And I'm running because you should have two clear choices on how you're going to close that gap. I believe if the Democrats take control of the state legislature, they will have a significant increase in taxes to cover that $400 million shortfall. Whereas if Republicans take control of the state legislature, you're going to see much more of the $400 million being cut out of the state government. And essentially when people go into the polls on November 2 or in October, you are making that decision with your votes for the House district, or if you're in one of the 50% for the Senate district. So that's the major overriding question for the state of Montana, is how much of that $400 million do you want to be increased in taxes, and how much of that $400 million do you want decreased in government spending? And I'll leave you with, keep in mind that on January 1st, you've got the largest tax increase in American history coming with the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. And whether you think the Bush tax cuts were good or bad or stimulated growth or blew a hole in the federal budget, regardless, they are expiring on January 1st. So every income level is having a massive increase in taxation. Inheritance taxes are going up. Dividend, capital gains taxes are all going up. That's at the federal level. And then at the city level, you've got the city of Missoula probably raising taxes by $500,000. It's not definite, but there's a very likelihood that the city will raise taxes by $500,000. So your only choice is what's going to happen at the state level, and whether government is going to be cut by $400 million, or taxes are going to be raised by $400 million, or how much of a proportion. Thank you.
I'd love to talk about that topic. You know, some people, I'm not particularly partisan enough perhaps in this case, but this deficit that we have of $400 million belongs to all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike. And I think actually one of the most interesting things about the last session is, you know, the Senate was in Republican hands, the governor's a Democrat, the House is 50-50 basically, and probably will continue to be somewhere close to that. And we all had to work together to figure out how to cut the budget where we could and to save money where we can. And I think we did that in a fairly nonpartisan kind of way because of the efforts of a number of people to try to build those relationships between people. And this next session will be that way as well. The governor has said absolutely that he will veto anything that looks like a tax increase. And trust me, from those of us who have tried in various ways, he will. I mean, there may be some fee increases, but I doubt even that. The $400 million has to come out of three places. It has to come out of schools, which basically it can't. It has to come out of corrections, which basically it can't. It'll have to come out of the Department of Health and Human Services where it can, which means it comes out of services to children and families and that sort of thing. And basically, our choices there are already very limited because we've already made basically a 20% cut in that. So there will be real pain. This is not a minor tinkering. I spent my first 4 sessions of the legislature as a lobbyist in appropriations and human services. Most legislators are never on appropriations. Carolyn, you've never even been on, have you, in all your years? Or on taxation. These decisions are made by a much smaller group of people, and then those of us in the whole get to tinker a little bit. But appropriations is playing Solomon. It is deciding who will live and who will die when it gets to that point. It's a very serious obligation, and we have to be able to do it because we do have a $400 million hole in the budget. Government will look fundamentally different at the end of the session. There'll be an overall general 10% reduction in the size of government, not across the board, and it will be permanent and it will be structural. And so we need your help with that. No one, Republicans or Democrats, are talking about increasing funds for anything. It's not responsible. People can't bear it at this point, and that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you.
Well, she painted a very nice picture, didn't she? And she's very much right in what's going to occur. And in regards to trying to find additional funding, this governor will not, absolutely will not increase taxes. And we have, like she said, 3 responsibilities: to medicate, educate, and incarcerate. And so those 3 responsibilities are what we have. That's the plain, ordinary language, sorry.
That's okay.
But those are the responsibilities that we have as a state with which to do. And that leaves a minimal amount of money, to divide up. Now, I served during the John Mercer years. How John Mercer managed to balance the budget was to cut the university system and put it into what he needed to do in regards to balancing the budget. Who is one of the largest groups of people who are out here crying? Right along with education. We are in the educational problem as a result of 8 years, and we still have not, and I'll be partisan, we still have not recovered from those 8 years of the speaker being John Mercer from Polson. I mean,
It's on your property taxes
and it's
now.
on the property taxes. And that's where my folks, where I live, have the biggest problem. And if you know where my area is over there, you know those are a lot of old-time type people who cry because they cannot. Now, there's been accusals of rigged Department of Revenue, all of these kinds of things. I don't believe that. What ended up happening, and Patty, you can keep laughing all you want, but I don't believe it. I believe that the assessments and the appraisals were done on the higher levels of homes. When my house rated more, I believe that that was done. I also believe that when they went back, they gave the second level, and that was the appropriate appraisal rate at that particular time. None of us, and I know that we've been accused of it, have received any benefits, from that particular reappraisal cycle, and I resent those remarks. Thank you.
Well, I'll put this in triplicate. The governor has promised not to raise taxes. I take the governor for his words. Okay? There is going to be serious pain after this next session about what happens here in the state of Montana. We are going to have to prioritize as to what we're going to fund. As an educator, a 30-year classroom educator, and a person who, as a flight instructor, also educates people in a hands-on training type of situation, I understand the importance of education in this community. I understand the importance of education in this state. So education, to me, is really, really important. But on the other hand, there is going to be a lot of pain, and it's going to be shared by literally everyone. And so it's important that you and this community communicate with whoever's elected here as to where we're going to go. That's really, really critical. We're going to have a lot of input from the citizenry. Now, to take this a little different, we also need to realize, well, what are some things we can do to help the state? And one is we need to improve, we need to grow small business jobs in the state. As a small business owner, our family farms, our small businesses are the key to this state. We need to help them, we need to get them growing, we need to move this state forward. And I think that's the other end of this thing we need to do. That's not going to solve the 2011 situation, but it can help us with 2013 and beyond. Thank you.
So,
Appreciate the time.
so if I could just ask my panel mates, I know the governor said he won't raise taxes, but he also said he won't cut any government workers or put any impact on any government workers. I've had my opponent sit in the Montana Downtown Association and say the communities need to band together to fight any cuts from the state government. You've just said two different areas, corrections and I can't remember the other one, where there will not be any cuts.
No, there will be cuts. We will, but the legislature makes those cuts.
So
We do the
where
budget.
is that 400 million going to come out of? then?
Everywhere. It's going to come out of everywhere. It's going to come out of absolutely everywhere.
Even though the governor has said he will not touch government workers.
No, he didn't say that. For now, with his, when you get to a certain, we call it the trigger point, when the estimated revenues coming in are not going to be adequate to keep the government, the budget balanced, which is a constitutional responsibility, the governor, first of all, has the prerogative to go in and reduce government by 10%. And actually, they did reduce the number of people because of vacancy savings. I mean, across the board and pretty much
Not
everywhere.
filling attrition.
Right, and doing away with a number of positions that were done away with. So they didn't lay anybody off, but they didn't hire anybody new, and they did away with positions. That's the current status. Going into the next session, we haven't seen the governor's budget. We don't know what he's going to suggest, but I think he is going to do away with whole programs. And so there will be people who work in state government who will either be consolidated into other positions, and some will, I think, probably with 10% everywhere, there will be positions lost. There's just no way you can permanently downsize government by 10% and not do that. But we have not seen the governor's budget, and he doesn't share that information with us. We're a different branch of government.
And I would have to think, if you're taking
It will happen.
400 million or 10% out of the budget, that you would have to take it out of every department, every area, and there won't be
Right.
any sacred cow saying,
There are no sacred
this is
cows.
off limits,
There
this is off
are no
limits,
sacred cows.
because then there isn't
Correct. There are
enough
no-
cuts.
Will face pain.
There are no sacred cows, but different departments are funded differently, and it's a complicated area that many people who are legislators, because they never work in this area, ever come to understand, is that many areas are self-funded in different ways, like the Secretary of State, all the business taxes you pay. That whole division basically gets no general fund. I mean, we appropriate general fund. Most of what we're talking about is general fund money, but there are a number of other revenue. If you're in Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, it's all hunting licensing fees that are appropriated in a different manner. So general fund money, which is what we're talking about, is actually restricted to these more areas where there's no matching and they're not based on fees. So it's a very complicated, coal tax revenue goes to certain specific areas. It's a complicated mix of things, but no, it will come out of absolutely everywhere.
But you have to provide those things such as education and corrections and health
law
and human
requires
services.
it.
Yeah, because the feds require it, and
Constitution.
State Constitution
requires it. So therefore, you have to provide those services. You cannot cut those services that are mandated.
And this is where I take an argument with you guys as the Realtors, with putting that on the ballot. I mean, I've run ballot measures successfully in the state and other states, and I'm not a fan of ballot measures, and I'll tell you why. Part of my work in Oregon involved working with ballot measures. If you look at California and states that use ballot measures, like to amend the Constitution and say, you got to spend this money on this, you can't tax this, you've got to tax this and give it to there, what you end up with is like California in an extreme case, where suddenly there's no flexibility in the budget for the legislators to say, we're in a crisis here, we need to do X, or we want to reappropriate that money for another purpose. So you've really limited the constitutional responsibility of legislators. The governor does not appropriate, the legislature appropriates, and we fiercely defend that constitutional responsibility. So when you put things in the Constitution, you're denying the legislature our responsibility to be able to appropriate funds. Theoretically, in your case, into the future. I mean, if we were in a crisis and we needed money, we might theoretically look at that. Otherwise, battle it out in the legislature. So, you know, I'm absolutely opposed in general to constitutional amendments. I think they screw up a document that's supposed to be primarily about generalities, but it also impinges on the authority and the responsibility of the legislature to raise and appropriate funds. So that's where I'm at on that
Okay,
topic.
I hate to cut you off.
Yes,
We're
it
running
is
way
afternoon.
over. I appreciate this discussion.
We love you, and we appreciate your asking
There's
us.
more than
Thank
enough
you.
time for everybody to hang out and talk further, so I'm sorry I don't mean to cut you off.
Thanks for inviting us, you
Yeah,
guys.
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, it's nice to meet you again.
Yeah, you should.
But anyhow,
I mean, you're not going to
I,
win in a district as Missoula's.
So I looked at it and I
mean,
thought, oh my God,
I'm
it's
sorry,
5
so many
after 2,
really good
because
Republicans
I
run.
have-